Hello everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have finally another boxing video within this channel. Now, I haven't done a boxing video for quite some time now because, to be honest with you, I haven't been as enthusiastic as with much of the fights that have been going on. Of course, the sport, like any other sport, has been hit majorly by the COVID pandemic, and we haven't really seen the fights overall that we've wanted to see, as certainly as a boxing fan, and that was even before the COVID pandemic was happening. So I think there's been very much of a lull within boxing overall in terms of the hype and excitement that we've seen certainly within the last couple of months, as the sport has been trying to make a steady return back to full prominence, just slowly now back into a regular run in terms of fights and the cards that have been put on. And of course, this will culminate in certainly what is without doubt the most biggest and prolific fight of the year that so far, and that is the major super middleweight clash between Saul Canelo Alvarez and Billy Joe Saunders. Now, in terms of the super middleweight, Saul Canelo Alvarez, he is the WBC and the WBA super champion, and Billy Joe is of course the WBO super middleweight champion. This fight will due to take place on Saturday, May the 8th, 2021 at the AT&T Stadium in Dallas, Texas, and this will be the first time I think that we will have a full capacity attendance ever since the COVID actually brought the sport to a halt. So this is a major significant occasion in terms of the sport. So if we quickly look at the records of both fighters, Canelo, as we all know, is deemed to be the biggest pound for pound superstar of the sport, and he has been an established fighter for well over 10 years now, having one loss on his record, of course, against Floyd Mayweather, and 2 draws overall. So when we look at Billy Joe, he has a record of 30 wins and 0 losses and 14 knockouts. When I look at this fight overall, I think, you know, we look at the pre-hype shenanigans, and just in case you don't know, there's been very much debate as to whether Billy Joe is going to get a fair shake, because as we all know, when you have a major pay-per-view fighter such as Canelo Alvarez, things are always going to be geared in their favour. You know, we go over so many times this B-side, A-side dynamic in boxing, which I overall hate. So there's always been this concern that Billy Joe is not going to get a fair shake in terms of the judging. If you follow the narrative of this fight, there's been recent debate about the ring size, the fact that Billy Joe wanted the ring size to be much bigger and Canelo wanted it to be much smaller. Now, you can take of that what if you will. There was a recent interview with Billy Joe's father, Tom Saunders. He was initially announcing that they were going to pull out of the fight. That was never going to happen because, of course, there would be far too many legal applications in terms of how much earnings would be lost if they pulled out of the fight voluntarily as opposed to injury. So that was never going to happen. I never believed in any of that. I think that was just to play mind games with Canelo and maybe drum up much more hype around this fight overall. Because I think within boxing, yes, it's been talked about, but I think outside of boxing, I don't think there's as much speculation about this fight overall. That's due to the fact that Canelo, as we all know, is very extremely limited English, so yes, he will primarily have his Mexican fan base supporting as well. It can't really transcend outside of boxing into general audiences overall. And of course, Billy Joe, as we all know, is a very controversial figure, and he's done very little in terms of media prior to this week going into this fight, and he's a very polarizing and diversing personality as well. So I don't think this is a fight that is going to have far reach in terms of mainstream audience, but certainly it will gather much hype within the boxing sphere as we all know it to be. Now, in terms of the actual fight, now I think Billy Joe, as we all know, he's not a power puncher. He's very much of a skillful boxer. He uses his jab a lot. He's a very much of an elusive fighter. So he's not going to look to seek and destroy Canelo. And this is where I think the debate was coming about the ring size, because obviously the bigger the ring size, the more advantageous it is for Billy Joe, right? Because he can move Canelo around the ring. It gives him much more space to maneuver. And I've been very skeptical about the whole complacency about the ring size, because if you truly believe that you are going to win, then it shouldn't matter, right? In terms of the ring size, whether it's smaller, whether it's bigger, right? You should go in there with the intent of taking it to the champion and looking to take him out. That's what I personally feel any underdog fighter should go to achieve when fighting. But Billy Joe is not going to adopt this strategy. He's going to look to frustrate Canelo, stifle him. We're going to see maybe a lot of grabbing, a lot of holding as well. Really look to take away any sense of pace and momentum about Canelo's work as well. So that's the tactic I think Billy Joe is going to look when going into this fight. He's going to look it to win on points, which is, again, I think another reason why they raise so much the issue of having fair judges in this contest. Now, as we all know, Canelo, he's very much of a power puncher. Yes, he's very durable in terms of his abilities, but his skill set is all about the counter punching, and in particular the body punches. So if he's going to come across somebody who's going to look and jab and move and be on the back foot all the time, then Canelo is going to look to grind him down with the body punches and then look to really finish them off and come in close overall. We saw this really comparatively with the Amir Khan fight. If you remember, that fight took place a couple of years ago, and Amir Khan had major success against Canelo, certainly within the first 4 rounds when he was using his longer jab and coming in with these quick, fast combinations in and out. And really for the first 4 rounds, he fought very much of a perfect fight game against Canelo, and then eventually Canelo just ground him down because of the extra weight, which had its telling difference overall, because Amir Khan is naturally a welterweight. So that's the similar dynamic I think we're going to see here. I think Billy Joe is going to win the first couple of rounds. He's going to frustrate Canelo. He's going to look to play all sorts of mind games. We're going to see lots of a little bit of shenanigans and mocking and tone of Billy Joe, very similar to what we see with Tyson Fury in a lot of his fights overall, because he's really going to try and unsettle Canelo and destabilise him mentally. But I think Canelo is too strong mentally for that. So I think this is going to be a fight that's going to go certainly within the late rounds. Me personally, I think it's going to be a points decision win for Canelo, because I think eventually the fact that he will become the much more aggressor, he will throw a lot more of the power punches, which will catch the eye of the judges overall. And I think that's what will tell, because eventually Billy Joe will have to try and be more aggressive, and I don't think he's going to do that. This is the problem when you are the underdog. You know, you've got really 2 ways you can really beat Canelo. You can either stick it on him, put it on him, lots of pressure, throw lots of punches, and really go toe-to-toe with him and really become more of the aggressor. Very much like what we saw with Golovkin. I still stand by the fact that I think Golovkin won both of the fights that they had together, most definitely the first fight, which was scandalous that it was even considered a draw overall. But if you're not going to adopt that tactic, then you've really got to fight evasively, as I mentioned before about Amir Khan, and Billy Joe is going to have to really fight 12 rounds of pure perfection if he wants to win this fight on points. He's really going to have to convince the judges without any sort of a doubt that he's scoring the more cleaner work, he's throwing the fast combinations, he's throwing the much more volume and output in terms of his work rate as well. He's going to have to punch well for 12 rounds in order to convince judges to give him the decision, and I can't really see that within Billy Joe. I don't think he's got enough about him to be able to outwork Canelo in terms of combinations and jabs overall for 12 rounds without getting pressured and caught in a later round. So if you were going to say it'll be a late round stoppage for Canelo perhaps, but I think Billy Joe, if he's in top condition, he's good enough to last the pace and get to the 12 rounds. But I just think overall he won't be able to make a big enough impact to sway the judges and get it on a points decision. So I'm going for Canelo on points. I think Billy Joe will be good enough and evasive enough to avoid getting knocked out, but he won't be good enough to make a big enough impression on his fight to the point where they will give him the points win, because as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, as we all know, the pay-per-view fighter, the A-side fighter is always protected as much as possible. So I think we're going to get a close point win for Canelo overall. So those are my thoughts and feelings and preview on the fight between Saul Canelo Alvarez and Billy Joe Saunders, due to take place this Saturday on May the 8th. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. As I mentioned before, I may try and go back to doing more regular boxing videos. If you go on the playlist within my channels, you'll see primarily a lot of boxing previews and fight reviews that I've done previous months off the channel. As I said before, I'm really now trying to regenerate my interest in the sport. Too many times we've seen too many mismatches and fights that are promised to be made and don't end up happening. Boxing is a sport very frustrating at times, because it becomes a lot more about the narrative and the fake news and speculation rather than the actual fights taking place. You know, we just have to talk about the AJ and Fury, all the endless back and forth. Is it happening? Is it not happening? I think we're still at least a year and a half away, particularly if we start to see crowds coming back into fights overall. They're going to want to at least have a couple of fights to get themselves back in shape. They're going to try and milk it a bit more, and who knows what will happen in terms of the heavyweight landscape in a year or two before we see any potential fight between the two. So that's the reason why I've really become frustrated by the sport, and I haven't covered it over the last couple of months. But if we get back to some sort of normalcy in the sport again, this fight in particular will be a huge barometer. Hopefully we don't see any cases of COVID come out when having a full capacity at this fight overall. So if it's a major success, if it's a really good fight, then maybe that will convince them more to put on these bigger fights in front of more bigger crowds. And then that's where we can see the truly big contests that I think benefits fans and the sports overall. So those are my thoughts and feelings on the fight review between Billy Joe and Saul Canelo Alvarez. Let me know what you think in the comments below. That's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.